This is Andy Pace. Excited to have everybody here on the show again today. We had great response from last week from having Jay Watts from AFM on. I know we had probably a couple dozen people on the live stream, and then a lot of folks watching it afterwards too. And as promised, I will get it up on YouTube eventually. You know, honestly, I really want our Circle community members to be able to view these first, and because we do get an awful lot of emails coming from people who watch these events and like the podcasts and the audio events and our video events, and so we really want to help out our own community first before we sort of let the rest of the world pick at us. So eventually we'll get this up on YouTube for everybody to view as well, but until then we're live here through the Circle community. So this week, we got a very special guest with us. I was actually on Casey's show, his podcast last year, and it really was a wonderful discussion, opened my eyes up to a whole host of different types of construction techniques, and I've been pouring through his website and a lot of the things that he does, and so I'm very excited to have Casey Gray with us this week from The Conscious Builder. And Casey, I am going to, let's see here. There we go. Bring it up on screen. So please introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so as you heard, my name is Casey Gray. I am the founder of The Conscious Builder. I've been in the industry, construction industry that is, for 20 years at this point. Been doing high performance homes and renovations for about 10, 11 of those years. Kicked it off with our first certified passive house, which was my own, which we've since sold, but that was about 10, 11 years ago, and haven't turned back since. Been doing high performance homes and retrofits ever since then. And we have our online content as well, our YouTube channel, podcast that you mentioned. Andy is episode 209 if you want to check out that episode. That was a great episode. Actually opened my eyes. You're saying it opened your eyes. Opened my eyes to a lot of stuff as well. So we actually had Andy come chat with our team after that, which was super beneficial. A lot of great questions came from that. And yeah, we're just continuing to do what we can in our little part of the world in Ottawa, and help people learn how to build better homes. Because I think a lot of people would build better if they knew better. Not everyone, but a lot of people just don't know because it's not information that you actively go out looking for. So we're hoping to change that.
Well, I think you're certainly off to a great start. I've looked at the types of projects you've done, and so just so you know, folks, I know we're having a little bit of audio issue on this stream. I apologize for that. Some things we just cannot control at this point. I'm hoping that in the recording, the audio is actually just improved, because it happened last week as well, and the audio is improved on the recording. But if you're having troubles hearing us, please bear with it. Hopefully it'll work itself out. All right, so on your website, you've got a whole host of things, and I'll put a link in on the chat box so everybody can go to your website and learn about what you do. But so, you really come in construction from the angle of energy efficiency, low environmental impact. Really, utilizing the best of technologies and techniques so that our homes not only perform at their highest level, but they also last a very long time. So that whole sustainability thing, my expertise is healthy building, not necessarily what you do. So that's why I find what you do so interesting. What brought you to passive home building? I mean, was there some event in your life that you just said, that it was like that aha moment? You said, we've just got to do this.
Yeah. So now what we do is, like, our slogan is health, comfort, efficiency. So we're focusing on building healthy homes and comfortable homes. And by default, you end up with an efficient home. And, whether if they're more interested in saving the environment or lowering the carbon footprint, that's fine, because everything we do is custom. It really depends on what the goal is of the client. Andy, you and I talked about this before on the podcast. It really depends. Even when it comes to healthy products, there's products that have chemicals in them, but then there's products that don't have chemicals, but then you end up with things like mold growing on it because it doesn't have the chemicals. So you have to stay on top of it, right? So both are equally unhealthy. Well, you'll speak on that, but those are types of decisions, right? So do you want to lower those? But to go back to your question, where it all started was actually kind of came right before my son was born. So my wife and I went to a Tony Robbins event. Actually, if I go back a little bit, what happened is I bought my wife a book called Success Principles by Jack Canfield. And I don't know why I bought her the book. I can't remember, to be honest. And within that book, though, she remembers reading about Tony Robbins, and she came across Tony Robbins. She's like, oh, I remember seeing him on TV when I was a kid. Looked him up, found out that he had this event called Unleash Your Power Within, said, hey, sweetie, do you want to go to this event? And, I'm a typical guy. I just said, sure. Didn't ask any questions, had no idea what I was going to, just knew that it was some personal development event. And I figured, it'd be good to attend it. Came out of that event and it was life-changing. And it's 100% true. It completely changed the way that we think, that one event. And from there, we signed up to a whole bunch of other events, but that was really the catalyst that started me thinking about, what do I want my business to represent? What do I stand for? What are my values? What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? And that's when I started to think about what I do. I'm like, obviously I'm in construction. I enjoy construction. What can I do in this part of the world? And then it wasn't until the word conscious started to come into focus. And then we found out at another Tony Robbins event, actually, that we were having our son. So he's now 9, but once we found that out, then my mindset shifted. Then it was less about me and more about him. And anybody who has kids gets that. You realize, like, all right, if I have to lead by example. I always tell people my son's my greatest teacher because he does what I do, not what I say, although he does listen quite well. But what I realize is that our kids are a good mirror image of us. If they have habits that we don't like, chances are they got it from us as the parents. So I realized I want to lead by example. How can I do that in construction industry? And, the Conscious Builder started off as a slogan. Eventually we rebranded, made that the name. But the idea, we have a lot of, big things planned for this. We have the Conscious Builder Academy that we've launched. The idea is really just to help educate people, but not just homeowners, but also contractors, on how to build better homes. And that's kind of been evolving and growing ever since. But catalyst was Tony Robbins and then my son.
Oh boy. It's interesting how I talk to people in all walks of this industry, and just about everyone I speak with always had that moment when they just said, we just got to do something different. What we're doing is not working, or it's, we understand that it's not, our customers are being affected, our family, our workers, what have you. It's just unfortunate that we have to have an event like that happen before people have that moment, before they just understand. And that's, of course, what you're trying to do, and us as well, with the educational series and what we're trying to do here. Just educate people, just get people to start thinking differently about what we're doing and make better choices. If I had a dollar for everybody who came to me and said, I wish I would have known about you last week or last year, I'd probably be retired by now. But for me, I'm just glad they're finally coming to the realization that they need to start making changes. So you really dove deep into Passive House. And for those who are listening that don't really understand Passive House too much, essentially it's the way I describe it to clients when they are inquiring. And I don't know as much about Passive House as you do, of course, but in my opinion, Passive House is one of those methods that if it's done correctly, you could literally heat your house with a hairdryer. And so, how do you describe Passive House to a new potential client?
So Passive House is kind of the extreme in terms of energy performance. To your point, yes, you could, in theory, heat it with a blow dryer, but the point that is making is that the amount of heat that you need can be produced by a hairdryer, but it can't necessarily be distributed by the hairdryer, right? It doesn't have a big enough fan. It doesn't get to all the corners anyway. So that's a whole other story. But the idea behind Passive House is not to confuse it with passive solar house. So there's a big thing that, pushed on passive solar houses where they're trying to use the sun to heat the home. Passive House, the actual certification, and there's two, there's Passive House International and Passive House US, doesn't care about heating the house with solar. It is one of those things where it gets factored into the calculations, but the idea is to make it as airtight as possible. They want to see 0.6 air changes per hour or less at 50 kilopascal. Mm-hmm. So that's ACH for short. And they do that through a combination of pressurized blower door tests. And then you kind of do both, right? So you suck air into the house and then you blow air out of the house because there's vents and stuff that open. And then you take an average of the two. Leave that to the energy advisors. And then you need to keep your overall consumption below, I think it's like 15 kilowatt hours per day, or I don't know exactly how it works out. I let the exact calculation on that, so don't quote me on that. But there is a certain energy consumption, and that will vary in terms of how you get there. Will vary depending on where you live. Right? We live, where we built it was in Ottawa, so we have extreme heat, we have extreme cold. So our walls ended up being our 73.5. We got a 0.5, if I remember correctly, like 0.54 ACH for our blower door test. We had like our 100 in the attic, our 30 below the slab. That's extreme. However, if you were to go to California, you could hit Passive House certification with like almost minimum building code of what we have in Ontario. Right. So it really depends on where you're getting it. And it's designed based on the lot itself. So I can't take a house if somebody tells you they can, this is a certified Passive House design, the answer is, well, no, technically it can't be until it's built. Because that same house, if you were to take our house, turn it 180 degrees and stick it on the other side of the road, it wouldn't actually be certified anymore because it had taken into account the overhangs that we had, the south-facing windows that let the sun in, and so forth for the heating demand. So there's all sorts of things that get factored in. So it really is the extreme. The only certified homes that we've done were our own, and then for other architects who are building their own houses. Very few homeowners actually want to pay for the certification because you have to get all the third-party certifications. So we're doing where we tend to be falling back to, or where clients tend to be falling back to, I should say, is to the new Canadian building standard, which is the net zero energy or net zero energy ready, which is not close to Passive House, but it's starting to incorporate, the building code is starting to incorporate the indoor air quality stuff, the air tightness stuff, the thermal bridging stuff, which is great to see.
We found that same thing with the U.S. Green Building Council's LEED program years ago, that eventually what would happen is contractors would decide that we could save the money for all the certifications and put it into the house or into the building itself and basically make it a better structure. And who cares if it doesn't have a plaque on the wall saying what it is? It's just a better structure, and it's better for the occupant. So I can see how that would be, the same thing as what's happening with Passive House, and of course any other green building checklist that's out there. They'll all improve because customers will say, all right, well, what about this? It's the LEED program. Okay, it's great for energy efficiency, but what about human health? And so they'll all evolve, but eventually you come up with almost like your own version of a combination of several of them, because you have found for your location, for your customer base, for the materials that you want to use and you normally use, this is the best combination of all these different certifications. And so when I get involved with a client, and they ask me if I follow any particular checklist, I usually say no. I look at them all, and they all give good recommendations in their own way, but you have to choose what works best for each individual client.
Yeah, exactly. And each individual client will have their different needs. I think the missing point when it comes to our homes is the appraisers and the real estate agents, right? They don't want any of this. They don't know anything about it. So until it's seen as valuable, there is no real value other than the fact that you just feel good about the certification if you have that plaque or that label on your home. Now, every once in a while, though, you will get people looking for something specific. So maybe there's no value to most people on that passive house, but there will be to somebody out in the marketplace if you're patient enough for them. And that actually just happened recently. I found out one of the houses we helped build, I had somebody reach out and he was saying, oh, we just bought, or we recently bought a passive house that was built in Ottawa. And I know that, you've built passive houses. So I had some questions. They had some like minor issues with something. I think it was with one of their doors or windows, if I remember correctly. But turned out the house that he was describing was the house that we helped build. So I was familiar with it. And he had actually had his eye on that house before it was even for sale. He just remembers seeing it go up. He followed the building. He said, if that house ever goes for sale, I want to jump on it. And it just did. And then they jumped on it. Right. So things like that do happen. But unfortunately, until the banks show up and say, like, yeah, okay, you have an R70 wall that's worth more than 2% on your value of your home. It's hard for people to swallow the financial side of things, especially if they're building something custom.
That's for sure. So, and I really apologize to everybody who's listening. I know we're still having some audio and video issues. What I want to do, Casey, is because this is a discussion that I want everybody to hear, and I'm afraid that if the audio issues are getting in the way of people listening today, I want to maybe schedule something for another day where we can talk about this again in more detail, where everybody can hear. But before that, I know there's some folks on here that are probably waiting to ask a question or two, and so if it's all right with you, Casey, what I want to do is go to Q&A right now, and then have you back on the show in a couple of weeks, so we can I can take care of this audio issue on our end here. This is a new thing for me, this circle community. Although Jay says that you sound fine. So, Jay, how do I sound? I'll let him respond to that. But it's just funny. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just hearing audio issues. And if anybody else is hearing audio issues, please just type something in the chat.
You're coming in a little scratchy to me, but I can still understand everything you're saying.
Okay. All right. So Jay's actually asking, interested in the preferred wall system in a passive home. And then secondly, can you ballpark the comparative costs, passive versus traditional?
Yeah, so that's always tricky because my first question is, what are we comparing to? And where are you building the passive house? Like I said, a passive house in Ottawa is going to be very different than a passive house in California. The other thing too is that what is the baseline that we're comparing to? A passive house does not mean a more expensive home. And the reason why I say that is because you can build let's say 3,000 square foot minimum code home that has a copper roof, gold floors, gold, you know what I mean? Like go the whole 9 yards, but it doesn't actually perform very well. And then build a passive home that's 3,000 square feet and performs amazingly well. And it costs less than that home. Right. So first we need to set what the baseline is, because what I can say is that you will spend more on your envelope. That means you will spend more on insulation. You will spend more on air sealing details. You will spend more on your vapor barrier because you'll likely put in a smart vapor barrier. And you will spend more on framing potentially to hold that insulation than whatever labor is associated with those things. You may also spend more on your windows and doors, but once again, it depends on what your baseline is. You can get very high performing windows. If you need passive house windows, it's, we get into a different ballpark, but poorly performing aluminum clad windows can also be very expensive as well. Sure, the product, the frame is better than PVC, but it still does not perform very well. So that's what I can say for that. You're, in theory, will save on your HVAC system because you will need a smaller heating and cooling system in a passive home. However, what usually happens is that people spend a little bit more because they put in the nicer ERV, or they go with the Zender unit, which is typical in the passive house world. That costs a lot more than the other ones. Now, in terms of the wall system, once again, it depends on where you're building it. We did ours as a double stud wall with a couple inches of insulation on the outside and then an insulation between those two walls, which was fairly easy to build. And we kept the structure wall to the exterior. A lot of people don't like that because it's too far to the exterior. They're concerned about moisture. So some people, we've also done one where we did the interior wall as a structural, but then you run into issues and lots of labor trying to put insulation on the outside of that, and foundation details and where does your wall sit and so forth. So you run into some added costs there. I'm talking about where we build to in California. You could easily do it with a 2x6 wall. Like our wall assembly that we do for net zero energy would probably be Passive House in California, which is simply a 2x6 wall with R22. We always use rock wool, R22 rock wool bat. And then you have your sheathing on the outside, which you can use zip sheathing and tape everything up if you like, or you can use OSB and use like a peel and stick membrane. We use the Adhero. And then you can add 2, 3, 4, 5 inches, however much insulation you need on the exterior of that. We typically can accomplish what we need to with 3 inches of rock wool. So that's not reinventing the wheel, right? We're still stick framing like we always have. The only difference is we're paying more attention to the air barrier and we're adding some more exterior insulation than what's actually required by code here in Canada or in Ontario now.
It's a tough question to answer, and I get that same question all the time. If you want to build healthy, is it going to cost more than building traditional? And the answer always comes down to if you compare quality level to quality level, right? And so what you're describing, the way you construct a passive house, and especially that exterior wall assembly, you can't compare it to any form of traditional construction. Maybe you could compare it to like ICF using, a Foswall material or something like that, maybe. And so you're probably at that point about a comparative price. I think last time I checked, ICF construction just for the exterior framing was probably about 30% more than traditional. Just looking at materials, material cost, not labor. And I think if you added in something like Foswall or the hempcrete or something like that, it's going to probably add a little bit to that price. But again, it's very, very hard to say what's a ballpark comparative cost, because very rarely does anybody price out traditional framing, traditional construction at the same quality level as what you're describing. So I can see that as being difficult. I know that in the past, one of the big hurdles of passive house, at least here in Wisconsin, there's been a few projects that I followed, and I know each and every one of them, the biggest problem they had were windows. Trying to bring windows in from Germany or something like that meet those requirements. Is that still the same issue that we used to have?
There's some North American options now. I haven't looked into actually certified passive windows recently, but I know that there are North American options. And I would agree, we've run into a lot of issues in the past, and the biggest issue, what we would run into is after sales service. So we'd get this product and then we run into issues, and then, there'd be like one guy serving all of North America sort of thing. Right. So we're like, and then he would come and he'd be in a bad mood because he was overworked, and can see where that goes. But those would be the issues that we run into. Now, if we're not going for that certified passive window, then there's a lot of options, because there's a lot of window manufacturers. There's no shortage of window manufacturers in North America. It's just a matter of finding the one that you like, that has a good reputation, and in my opinion has good after sales service, because that is key. And the other thing I'll add to that as well is custom homes are just expensive, right? In comparison, right? That if they were cheaper to build, everybody would be doing it. But the fact is that it costs you more to build a custom home because of everything that's required, right? You got to buy the land. I've had a lot of these conversations. You got to buy the land. You got to pay for your design, pay for all your development fees, pay for your permits, pay for engineers. Like, there's all sorts of costs that aren't that are kind of factored into when you go buy a new home from a builder, right? A new home, that's all going to be like they're working on a bunch of the same projects at once, so you get it for a lot less. Or the fact that you go buy a home that's 30, 40, however many years old. The fact is that homes go down in value and properties go up. And what you typically pay for is the property, and there happens to be a home on there, then great. But it's just, if you're building a custom home, you're falling into that 1% of people who are doing, it's probably a lot less than that, but that are actually building it. And then I always say that we're kind of building for the 1% of the 1%, because we're building for the people who are able to build a custom home or have the land and so forth, and that are actually interested in building something better for whatever their reason is. Now, that being said, we do a lot of renovations for people too. You can improve the home that you're in, and usually that's a much more cost-effective approach, and it usually can be done in a phased approach as well. You might not be getting a passive house, but we can still get you your healthy home.
Sure. Well, and that too is that in a whole house remodeling project, now investing in better materials to make the whole, like if you're gonna be doing a whole house gut job, a whole house remodeling, this is where you look at it and say, okay, but if we take the siding off of the house, now we could add a couple of inches of rigid on the exterior as well as new insulation in the cavity. And, those extra dollars you spend during this phase will definitely come back in the form of value and comfort and energy savings and so forth. And the same is true, again, as you were talking about with custom home building and passive house and so forth. I tell this to clients all the time. It's if you have available dollars in the project to spend it on the exterior elevation to improve the integrity of the assembly, to improve the windows. I mean, windows are always going to be your biggest form of energy loss in the house, right? And so, I mean, if you have your wall assembly and it's an R23 assembly, but then every 16 inches on center you've got a stud, but so that's reducing. But then every time you have a window, what a really good window, if you were to look at R values comparatively, instead of, and obviously in the window, fenestration, you're looking at U values, but if you were to compare, a really good window would have like an R value of 7, maybe. And that's a really good window. Passive house or anything up to that standard would have an equivalent of like an R11, R13, triple pane, argon filled, and the really intricate framing and so forth. But so think of your house. The more windows you have, the more possibility of energy loss. And so spending money on better windows will come back to you in the form of energy savings.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, it depends on what it is. Like when you're renovating, I think when the energy modelers look at it, your windows, although they can have a big impact, there's usually, when you compare it to the price, the amount that you get, the impact that you get for the amount that you have to pay, it often is a hard sell on an ROI. But I can definitely say that from a comfort perspective, it's huge, because when you have a double glazed window and it's minus 20 Celsius, I know we're talking probably to Americans here, so whatever that works out to Fahrenheit. And we used to have wood. Actually, I can tell you, one of the houses we were living at, our couch was in front of a big, basically just fixed window, and it was double glazed. And I would sit there, and I could feel the draft on the back of my head, at night, because the sun would go down, so I wouldn't feel it kind of during the day. Not that I'd sit on the couch during the day anyway, so it's probably why I never felt it. But anyways, I digress. At night, I could feel it on the back of my neck. Once we changed that to a triple glaze, you didn't even have to go to passive, but just a good performing triple glaze window, I didn't feel anything. Because what happens is that you get the convection current, right? So it feels like the window's leaking, but it's not. It's just the fact that the window, the inside pane gets so cold and it meets the warm air, it creates a convection loop. So it starts to move the air around, even though and it makes it feel like it's leaking. But now I'm way more comfortable. I don't have to close the blinds in front of it. I don't have to put a sweater on. I can sit in front of that window on that couch and not be affected by it. So from a comfort perspective, it's actually huge. But if you ever have the opportunity to do your envelope and your windows are also getting old, it would be a waste not to do your windows at the same time as your exterior, like insulation and siding and so forth, because you'll never be able to seal those windows up as well as you'll be able to when you do the entire exterior retrofit. I think you're muted there, Andy. Are you muted, Andy, or is it just me? Can you hear me, Andy? I think you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
So Jay wants to know if any rammed earth or poured earth wall buildings are going on, and either in your company or in the industry around you.
I'm not aware of any. I'm sure there are. I've recently had a good conversation. We haven't released it yet with natural buildings specialists, so like straw bale, that sort of stuff. I've only ever been to one rammed earth. Although it's great, it's from it's basically a piece of art. Their performance isn't necessarily as good as we can get with some of these other wall assemblies we're talking about, and it's super expensive. The way they do the rammed earth, at least when I saw it, is that you have the rammed earth on either side and you have the insulation in between. Right. But there's only so much insulation that you can get in there unless your wall is going to get super thick. So it depends on what you're looking for. And it's definitely, when you get into things like that, if it's just your house, what I find is like the people who are interested in that are typically really involved in building. They want to do it themselves or they want to be involved in it. So then you might find the one person who does it. So we might not be involved in something like that. Whereas we're building homes for people who are just, they're interested, they want to be involved, but they're like, they know enough to know that they don't know enough. So they hire us. A lot of people might hire us to do the envelope, get it to a certain point, and then they will take over and do the finishing.
Sure. Well, you also have to take into consideration that, and this is true with any home you're going to build, that 95 or 99% of the homes you're going to build, you're going to have a lender involved and a title company and so forth. And a lender is not going to give you the value that you need in order to afford to build some of these really exotic methods of construction. Even here in Wisconsin, lenders still have a hard time giving people what they need to build log homes because they look at it as being an odd home. They'll look at it and say, you can do the exact same thing with traditional construction for 30% less, so we will give you the value of that of 30% less. And you got to come up with the rest of it on your own.
Yeah, and they're also concerned about the fact of if they get stuck with it. Not a lot of people just get afraid, right? If it's not the norm and they have to sell it,
right?
They don't want to have to deal with that, right? So they're just managing their risk at the end of the day. So if you want to do anything like that, then yeah, you're going to have issues with the bank if you're borrowing money. You're going to have issues with the appraiser to give you a good value because there won't be any comparables. You're going to have issues potentially with trades who aren't used to it, right? When you're buying, so they're going to charge you more just to deal with that because there's going to be additional time for them or they just don't know. So there's a lot of things that come with building something that's out of the ordinary, even though to you it might seem ordinary because there is a lot of people doing it often, but it's not the norm. It's a very small percentage.
I think a lot of the lenders learned a lesson back in the 70s when geodesic domes got very popular. And, and then in the late 70s and early 80s when interest rates got so high and people had they were moving out of their homes. They couldn't afford it. They couldn't get rid of these homes, and they literally ended up selling them for pennies on the dollar. Now, I've worked with some folks who have bought some of these older geodesic dome houses, and to fix them later on, to repair them, is ungodly expensive, and to do it healthy is almost impossible now because of the insulation that they need in the panels. But in any event, yeah, I think that's just a lesson to think about, that if you're going to be building a super high energy efficient home, a healthy home, if you're going to be spending more than what the bank is normally used to, you may have a discussion on hand or an argument maybe with the lender to say, here's why it costs more, and here's why we need more value for this, and why, obviously the resale value should be higher. And so working with somebody like you, you've been down this road before with clients, I'm sure. And so anybody who's listening from up in your area, this is exactly why you work with someone like Casey, because this company's been down the road before. I'm gonna, if there's any other questions from anybody, I haven't seen any others come across yet, but Casey, if you don't mind, I'm going to cut this short today, because we'd love to have you. I'd love to have you back on when I can hear you better. It must be something on my end, and I greatly apologize for this. I am hearing about every fourth word, and as much of a technological guy as I am, I think I am, apparently I'm not. So I need to improve things here on my end. And we'll definitely have you back on the show in a few weeks, and we can have a further in-depth conversation about this, because I know that I've had several people reach out looking forward to this discussion, and there's a lot more we want to talk about. So in closing, though, is there anything that you're working on right now that you feel like you want to tell us about?
Yeah, actually, there's a couple things for anybody listening. So definitely check out our YouTube channel and our podcast. Like I said, Andy was episode 209 on the podcast, but we have weekly videos coming out on the YouTube channel as well. So all sorts of different content there. If there's anything in particular that you're looking for, if you can't find it for some reason, let us know. I think we have over 400 videos now. So shoot us or comment or something. We try to get to everything. And the other thing is, actually in the US, if anybody's interested in solar panels, I've actually teamed up with Apricot Solar. So I wish I was in the US because of the potential with solar. It depends on where you are, but there's some great incentives. So if you go to theconsciousbuilder.com/solar, I can actually see if your home qualifies. And I'm modeling some homes, and they're coming out ahead, no money down, and saving thousands of dollars in the long run, right? When you drop it out. And that's something that actually does add value to your home when I speak to real estate agents. So there's huge potential. And because solar's dropped so much in price over the last 10 years, and because of the incentives, like you're getting 30% and sometimes more if there's state incentives as well. I highly recommend anybody look into that just because I think it's a smart investment, guaranteed investment. So that's theconsciousbuilder.com/solar. And YouTube, just search The Conscious Builder, will pop up. Everything is under The Conscious Builder. So you can find us everywhere.
Excellent. I put a link to the website in the chat box here. And folks, of course, Casey's now a member of our circle community here. And if you have any questions or about what he does and what he could do for you, please feel free to post it here on the circle community, because we'd all be able to learn from your questions. So without anything else to say from anybody, Jacqueline, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. She's happy to have you, Casey, and she's loved hearing about everything you're working on. So folks, thank you so much for coming today and listening. Casey, we will see you probably in a few weeks, and I'll have everything fixed on my end.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Andy. Really appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you.